right, welcome back to EchoVideo Podcast. This is episode 2, and today joining me is Bart Streppel and Shawn Gorsline. How's it going, guys?
Hey. Good. Glad to be back.
Yeah, same.
All right, so for today's episode, we're going to start talking about hidden gems and underrated movies. So basically what defines underrated is just a movie that when it came out, never got the attention it deserved. So it could have been a lot better, or a movie a lot of people haven't heard. So I'll start it off. I'm going to start by talking about a movie from 2015, and it's probably one of my favorites. It's called The Love Witch, and basically this movie isn't, acting-wise, it's not fantastic. And in fact, I've shown this movie to a couple of people, and everyone that's seen it has hated it. I think the reason is it's just hard to follow. It's a little long, but the reason why I like it personally, and I think some people shouldn't skip on it, is that the whole movie is an homage to the 70s, and it has such great filmmaking when it comes to the 70s. Every part of the film feels almost authentic to the year. And that, again, I think is why the acting is so bad. I believe it's done on purpose as to look like a 70s B movie. And I think that should be praised as opposed to hated on. And to people that don't like this movie, I can kind of understand. There are some moments I will agree that drag on, but I definitely feel if you are a fan of the 70s and you love kind of that 70s B movie feel, you'll feel right at home with this movie. It's fantastic. It's made really, really well. And every time I watch it, I get a good laugh out of it from the cheesy acting and the cheesy set pieces and that. So I definitely feel this is a movie that shouldn't have been missed back in 2015, and I still feel like it's relevant today. So yeah, definitely check it out. I think it's best if you go into it blind, not knowing too much about it, because there is some stuff in that movie that can catch you off guard and just be all the better for not knowing the twists and turns that come up. So I'm going to pass the conversation on. What's a movie that you guys have that you guys think was underrated or not known about as much?
For me, I think it would have to be The Nightingale by Jennifer Kent. So it's the follow-up, not a sequel or anything, just a follow-up to her first premiere, The Bolduc. Came out in 2018, and I feel like not a lot of people saw it. A, because it was incredibly hard to find anywhere. It didn't come to Blu-ray until I don't know. I don't think it ever came to Blu-ray, actually. So I just found it on YouTube somewhere eventually. But it is just a very raw, harrowing tale of this woman just trying to survive. It's set in colonized Australia by the British, and she's Irish, and she's like a prisoner brought to Australia for like a working camp almost. And this is set in 1600s, so kind of gives you a feel for it. But anyway, just the way that the entirety of Australia is shot, it becomes such a character itself. Like the filmmaking, it does nothing fancy, but with that, it keeps everything really raw and contained, and the story can be really messed up at times, and there's some really, really graphic stuff happening. So it's quite a shock, really. And I was just sitting, especially the first 20 minutes, my jaw was just on the floor. And it was, but it is a kind of a beautiful story inside of that. And I got to give it to Aisling Francesco. I absolutely butchered that. But anyway, she's the main actress. And she is so incredible in this. She doesn't talk a whole lot, but there's so much emotion from her face. And then Hawken is played by Sam Claflin, and he's like the main baddie, I suppose. But he is honestly one of the most unlikable characters I've ever seen in a film. Like everything you hate about a person, he does it. And he's just so ruthless. And just watching those two go up against each other, it's just, raw.
So story-wise, is it a lot similar to The Babadook? Is it being a psychological kind of horror film, or is it more of a different, or is it even horror? I'm not sure if you answered that, but what kind of genre would it fit in?
I wouldn't say it's a horror movie. Like, there's definitely horrific elements to it, but I think it's more of a story about kind of like how the Babadook was about grief. This one's more so overcoming grief as a nation, as a people, kind of fighting back against the British colonizers. Lots of elements of identity, keeping that resistance to all of that. It's, I guess, in a way, grief, but on a much more national shared level.
Okay, yeah, no. Yeah, that makes sense to me. How about you, Shawn? What's your movie you want to talk about?
So there's a 2014 low budget kind of sci-fi movie. It called Timelapse, and it's a movie. It has Danielle Panabaker in it, which is Killer Frost in the Flash TV show, and it's a really interesting film. I haven't seen too much about it ever since I watched it, and I thought I believe it's got like positive reception, but outside of what it did when it first came out, no discussions have really come up about it. But it's essentially about these like three people that live together in a house, and they discover this old guy that lives right across from them. He wasn't taking any of his mail, and they figured out that he had died. And so they go into his house and find a almost completely empty room with tons of photos of their house from across the street, taken from this camera that's in this room, and it's their front window, and it shows what's going on in that room. But what they find out is in that room, each photo is of the next day. So it's actually a photo taken from the future, and they can see it. So when they discover this, of course, they use it to their advantage in all sorts of ways, and they also try to figure out what's going on and how that's happening. And they also kind of look through some of the older photos and figure out how long this has been going on. And I don't want to say too much more, but a lot of stuff happens with that concept. It's a really simple concept, but they do a lot of cool stuff with it. And they also show usually they might show somebody taking advantage of something like that and just being like, oh yeah, this is how it happens. But they really go into detail as well with that kind of thing, and really show the whole process of what they're doing, which is kind of cool and something I usually don't see in like a kind of time travel-ish movie like that. So it's really cool. I think it's a really, really good film.
All right, yeah, interesting. So the next film I'm gonna talk about is a film from the 80s. It's called Demons, and it's directed by Mario Bava's son. I think it's Lamberto Bava, I believe. I could be wrong on that. But the reason why I love this film so much is it's basically, you take The Exorcist. So you take The Exorcist, you put it all in the movie theater, and then you give everybody a ton of acid, and the movie's fantastic. It's so much fun. It's the most fun I've watched, like the most fun movie I've watched in quite a long time. It's beginning to end. There's no downside of the movie. There's always something happening. There's always some extreme happening. It's got quite a bit of extreme gore effects and some fantastic 80s practical effects from the time. There's a couple of downsides I can give the film. That would be just the dubbing. It's an Italian film, so you can't really go great with an English dub of the film. So I do recommend watching it in the original language. Other than that, though, the acting is itself, looking aside from the dub, is fantastic. The sets are fantastic. The soundtrack is amazing. The effects are like unbeatable for the time, especially. It's quite possibly one of the better films I've seen in the last couple of years, and the only reason I kind of know of it was just scrolling through the internet and looking up films by Mario Bava, and then I realized, oh, there's his son directing and Mario Bava himself is kind of an underrated film director, I would say, directing some films like Black Sunday, Blood and Black Lace, which is another film I'll talk about later, but I think he himself is an underrated film director, and I think if you haven't checked any of his films out, he's inspired filmmakers like Tarantino and quite just basically the modern horror as it is today. So I definitely do recommend checking out Mario Bava, and I definitely highly recommend checking out Demons if you haven't seen it. And that's all I have to say. So what's your next movie you want to talk about there, Bart?
So for me, it's got to be Honeyboy, which came out in 2019, but I finally saw in 2020 after just months of delays, and it was supposed to come to Prime, and then it didn't, and then to the theater, and then it didn't, and then I finally got my hands on it. But yeah, so as I said, so Honeyboy was the film in 2019 that just kept getting pulled away from me. But I must say, I'm so glad I finally got to see it. So what it does is Honeyboy loosely tells the autobiographical story of Shia LaBeouf, like his rise to fame, as a child actor, and just his troubled relationship with his father. So what's interesting about it is that Shia LaBeouf stars in the film, but he plays his own dad, which I think is just such an interesting concept, because the relationship between him and his dad is just toxic, to say the least. And it's just so interesting to see him embody that, like how he saw his dad then, and then playing that. It's just I don't know. I think that's so great, and I could talk about that all day, honestly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and so this movie released this year or last year? I can't fully remember.
It was
the release date.
Released in 2019 theatrically, but just really small theaters if anybody really wanted it. And then it came to Prime in the US for a while, and then it finally came to Canada. So now you can watch it in Canada.
Okay.
Which is nice, just on Prime.
Yeah, for sure.
But the film also stars Lucas Hedges and Noah Jupe as the 12-year-old who plays Shia LaBeouf, as a 12-year-old. And just, he knocks it out of the park. Just the dialogue between Noah and Shia LaBeouf is just incredible. It's snappy, and just, it's also kind of just really messed up how they deal with it and how they talk to each other, and how that, you can kind of just see the ball starting to roll, and how he makes choices. Now they're all influenced by his dad, because at his core, his dad is like a failed actor himself, and he's just putting all this pressure on, Noah, so young Shia, to just do everything that he couldn't do, and it's just, sorry?
Oh, so the film can also be kind of looked at as just kind of how child actors were treated back in, and I guess they still kind of be treated poorly by their parents today. I mean, I don't know any child actors, but I do remember back in the 80s and stuff, there was kind of parents just really milking off their kids' fame and just pretty much using all their money for their own, and it's just kind of a dirty kind of business to read about, especially some of the what happened to some of the the child actors back in like the 80s, I think. So is it kind of like showing that aspect of Hollywood, or is it more just a dad forcing his kid to do stuff that he wasn't himself able to do?
Yeah, so I think it's not only the dad forcing him to do things, it's also the way he does that. So like you said, he just reaps all the benefits from his son's success that he never got. So he'll take his kids' money and, I don't know, use them to buy drugs, or, I don't know, sleep with prostitutes or whatnot. He takes all his money, and when other people try to, make good choices for young Shia, like this agent will try to get him into this good camp or this good class or whatnot, and the dad will get super defensive about it because he just knows exactly what's best for him, apparently. And it's just such an interesting dynamic. And yeah, it definitely portrays how parents just can completely take over, and then you can see kind of Shia turning to drugs and just kind of becoming the exact same person his dad was, but without just spoiling it, as you know now. He kind of turns away from that and gets his own life, and it's just a great movie. Really sad, but incredibly well acted, beautifully shot with incredibly nice long wonders of just dialogue. And I feel like a lot of it feels improvised. I'm not sure if it is, because it just feels like, I don't know, so real. It could just be really well written. I'm not sure. But yeah, you definitely check it out. Great film. And yeah, great film.
All right, moving on. Shawn, what's another film that you think is underrated or a hidden gem?
So there's a film that, and I still am not quite sure. So it was a film that I watched in 2019, but apparently came out in 2020. So I'm assuming it was kind of held back and had like a bit of a release, and then had a more major release in the summer of this year. It's called Vivarium, and it stars Jesse Eisenberg and female actress I don't know, but she did a really good job as well. And it's just about these this couple that goes to like a suburb area and looks for a new house, and it kind of has an aesthetic that looks very like it looks very similar to like the Cat in the Hat movie. It's very over the top, super colorful, and it looks really, really wacky. But they find this house, and they're shown inside. They take a look around, and then they walk out of the house, and they're like kind of stuck there, just those two in this giant like suburb area that stretches on and on for infinity, and they aren't able to actually travel away from this house very far. They can go like a block and they're back at the house that they're at, and they're like forced to live their life in this house because they can't get out, and they go through a bunch of really weird things. And I don't want to say too much about it because it's such a wacky film. It's one of those films you watch once and you're going to want to watch again because there's so many like little details you can miss. It's fantastic. I think just because of the time that it came out, like I'm confused, and I'm somebody who watched the film like of when it came out. So I think a lot of people probably haven't heard of it just because its release seems to be really odd. But it is really cool. It has a cool twist at the end, and color-wise, it's very colorful. That's what I can say. It's got a really interesting look throughout the whole film as well. And it uses color with against very monochrome colors every once in a while to bring up themes visually that way as well. So yeah, really cool film. I don't want to say too much more about it, but it is really, really well done.
So just looking at the reviews here, it seems like just everyone was kind of split on the release, like on how they liked it. It's pretty split review-wise and stuff, so I could see that.
I think you're either going to think this film has a lot of cool things in it, or you're going to just be like completely confused and be like, this is complete nonsense and really stupid. I can totally see that. I think it was really, really good. But there were a few points I would say that happened in it that, especially in the starting, I think it explained the concept well, but it did kind of lack a little bit of that. Like it did seem like it was kind of, I don't want to say forced, but it just felt a little too like, oh, this is exactly what this is, and it seemed like the characters knew a little more than they should have known right then and there. But as the film goes on, it definitely is. I think it gets better as it goes.
Okay, interesting. The next, I have two films, and the reason I'm putting these together is they're both by Stephen King, and I think they were both skipped over, which is a shame. And the reason I think they were skipped over is they were both released in 2017, and I think they were released after Stephen King's It. And 2017, from what I remember, had a ton of Stephen King movies being released. I think you had Dark Castle in the summer, and then September you had It, and then October and maybe November was Gerald's Game in 1922, and those are the films I want to talk about. They came to Netflix. They were both Netflix originals, so I think that might have an issue why not a lot of people saw them. The other reason was maybe people were just kind of Stephen King'd out by the time they were released. And the other thing, I just think there was a lack of advertising for these two films. I remember the only reason I knew of Gerald's Game was because I follow the director Mike Flanagan pretty heavily on what he's doing, and I just kind of happened to see, oh, he's doing this movie, it's releasing then, so I knew exactly when it was coming out and like exactly when I was watching it pretty much. But I remember even hopping on Netflix that day. There was no banner, no trailer, no this is recently released. It was kind of almost like I had to search for it, which I think was kind of weird. But even that being said, I think both of those films should definitely not be skipped. Gerald's Game I'm going to talk about first. Basically, it's just this woman gets stuck on a bed, handcuffed to a bed for the whole day, or not the whole day, a couple days, and she just basically has to survive and live with herself and kind of come to terms with who she is as a person before she can find the courage to escape. And I think it's super well directed. It's super well shot. It's honestly kind of scary, honestly. Like I don't really find a lot of horror movies today scary. I mean, that doesn't mean I find them not good, but I definitely was a little affected by this, especially at an ending scene kind of made me cringe and squirm a little bit. I won't spoil it here, but there is some stuff that's pretty uncomfortable to watch in that movie, and I definitely do recommend it. I think personally it was better than it. I think it was better than the novel, which is rare, and I think it was in all a fantastic film. Yeah, again, acting, I can't remember the actress's name, but she nailed it. Probably one of the best roles I've seen her play in a while. And I think if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. The other film, 1922, again, this is another one that I feel was released kind of around the same time, again, also to Netflix. But the thing that I liked about this film was just the narration and the what's it called? The aesthetic of the film. It had this kind of, in my opinion, that's as perfect as a Stephen King aesthetic you can get was in 1922. You kind of had this big summer blockbuster feel, kind of looking back at the films of the 80s, which is fine. I'm not hating the film for it, but it didn't really feel like a Stephen King like a Stephen King adaptation, in my opinion. But 1922, I think, hit it out of the park with the aesthetic. Every second of that film, it just is honestly almost like you're reading, like, it's hard to say. It's almost like you're sitting there reading the novel, and it's just so perfectly with the aesthetic and everything. It's just a great film. It has some of the best narration in film I've heard today, and the actor, again, I'm sorry I can't remember his name at the time, but he nails it out of the park. And yeah, again, it did kind of scare me. There's some moments in this film that did run shivers down my spine, and I definitely think that this film deserves a better legacy than it was given when it came out. And I hope that everyone that has not heard of the film or has heard of the film and thought of checking it out definitely checks it out, because it's fantastic.
Which would you say is better, 1922 or Gerald's Game?
In my opinion, I would say not 1922. I would say Gerald's Game is the better film. It just has a little bit more of an original idea, in my opinion, but I definitely feel like the 1922 feels a little more like Stephen King, but I definitely feel 1922 is the better made film in the end. Any other thoughts on the two films there, or did we want to go on to the next film that you had, Bart?
Yeah, I can go on. So I'm going to talk about Shadow, and I know you've also seen it, so we can kind of go back and forth if you like. But I wasn't going to delve too much into plot, just because it's pretty complicated, and I don't want to give anything away, because it's really great. It takes some time to get going, but it pays off. So I'm just going to let you enjoy that if you do decide to see it. But what I do want to talk about is the direction, and the direction is absolutely meticulous, and it really lends itself to the film's just gorgeous aesthetic, which you'll see even on the box art, like the strong contrast between the black and the white. It's the entire
film
film.
The entire film was done to look like a Japanese ink painting, so it was mainly black and white, but then it also had tiny hints of red throughout the film. And yeah, I think it's super incredible to look at. And yeah, like you said, it's a gorgeous film to watch.
Mm-hmm. I think what you were saying, I was just going to go off of that. So the fight sequences, so you're talking about how it's made to look like a painting. The fight sequences are kind of choreographed, so it always looks like they're almost painting, and like every swing of the sword, drop of rain, bit of blood spilt, it all leaves like this impression on a scene, and it just builds this pictured frame basically, and it's like on a blank canvas, and it's stunning. And going a little bit more off of that, so every scene is just so aesthetically pleasing that I just want more. And I would love to have one of those posters, just of even just a frame, just have it up on my wall. And in every scene almost there's kind of like this battle happening, whether it be in the dialogue or the music or just the warfare. There's always something at conflict with each other.
Yeah.
And it's just throughout the entire film, and every part of it just builds onto the next, and it's just orchestrated so well. And it's just an awesome way of raising the stakes in the film, and it's so incredible how well it builds itself up.
I would say probably the one reason, a reason that it might not have done, or a lot of people might not have seen it, is it's pretty complicated to follow, and throw on subtitles, and the fact that it's all in Chinese is that it is a little much to follow at times, and the story can be a bit complex. So I find that a lot of times, and there's not kind of contradicting what you're saying, but there's not a lot of action scenes, which is what I feel like a lot of people would be, especially with the cover of the box art of the film. It looks like it might be just a kind of classic martial arts kind of martial arts kind of film, and you do get some pretty stellar scenes and some pretty stellar action scenes, but there's not as much as you might think, and I think that might be a reason why it wasn't as widely received as some might think. That being said, though, it is if you can look by that, and if you can pay attention to the story, it is fantastic. Like you were saying, I do agree 100% that it is a really, really good film.
I think a second viewing would definitely give it you could follow it a little bit more cohesively, because the story is quite complicated, especially just diving into it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Shawn, what was your next film you wanted to talk about?
Just before I get to that too, I am somebody who has not seen that movie at all, that you were talking about, and I'm sold on it now. Now I'll watch it. It sounds entertaining. It does.
No, yeah, it's definitely it is fantastic and definitely worth the watch. Yeah.
I was going to talk about a movie called Freaks. Came out in 2018, and it's a movie that, again, it's a movie I don't want to say too much about, because especially this one, I think it's great to go in blind, because the way that it's presented in any of its trailers is kind of like a horror movie sort of thing, but it has horror elements, and it definitely starts off that way, but it turns into a much different film by the end, and it's really interesting. The most I can say, the way it starts off is it shows a girl and her father essentially living in a house. It's completely covered up. You can't see outside whatsoever. And the father will not let this girl go outside whatsoever, because it's supposedly dangerous outside. And they do show the outside and what the girl sees whenever she gets a glimpse of the outside, and it looks perfectly normal. Nothing looks out of the ordinary. Everybody looks like they're having a great time. And so she's like, everything looks normal. I want to get outside. And eventually she does get outside, and from there it kind of it has horror movie elements to start, but then things start to turn into something else. And I don't want to say too much, but it is really, really cool. I heard about it just because I was looking up Canadian films, and I believe it's part Canadian. I think it was produced by some Canadian producers, but also there was some stuff with the States. Either way, it's a really cool film. I highly suggest to check that one out. It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Now that you describe it, I definitely remember the advertising for this film a couple times.
Mhm.
And I definitely, yeah, I know what you're talking about, how the trailers kind of make it out to be a horror film. And yeah, I never ended up checking it out. And I think the reason for that was, like you said, it had horror films. And I remember when it comes to horror films, for me, it's kind of hit or miss in the trailers. And if you miss, I kind of don't really give you a second glance. But if you do happen to pull my attention into those trailers, then I do kind of look you up and try to find a little bit more. But I definitely feel like that was one of the issues might have been with the marketing on that film, where it's kind of just this generic looking kind of weird horror film, and it just never kind of caught my interest. But now that you kind of described it a little bit more, I will definitely check that out for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to bring it up, because like their whole approach to all the marketing was just like, oh, let's just show a tiny fraction of what the movie is. Let's show as little as possible, because honestly, the best way to watch it is to know the least amount. So I understand where they're coming from with the advertising once you've seen it, but to somebody who hasn't seen it, they did not make it they didn't present it well enough to make somebody go like, oh, I want to watch that, because that's going to be really,
For
really
sure.
different. So yeah.
So this has no relation to Freaks from 1932.
No, it doesn't. Don't believe it does anyway.
All right. Because that movie was just bizarre. It was about a bunch of circus freaks that try to kill this woman. It's amazing, but I think it was exploitative in a way, because they used real circus freaks, like a real dude with no arms and legs, and it's uncomfortable to say the least. But I think it is. That's another film I don't think was heard about. Was it Freaks from 1932? You just kind of brought that into my head, but definitely check that one out. Again, the less you know, the more, the better it is. That's all I'll say about that, because that was kind of improv. But the next movie I'm going to talk about is The Wailing from 2015. This is a South Korean horror film. And I just don't think this was marketed enough over here. And again, I found this one out just from sheer luck. I was in high school watching a ton of South Korean films, just kind of foreign films in general, and I happened to stumble across this, and my God, it's a bit much at times. It is pretty scary, but I think it's top class. It's a really well made horror film. The cinematography is amazing. The story is amazing. There's it's filled with twists and turns and stuff that really you have to focus on. So again, it's pretty long. It's a little under 3 hours. It's a little under 3 hours, and it definitely can feel like it at times that you're watching a pretty long film. But if you give it a chance and you watch it all the way through, there's a couple of scenes in this movie, especially I think they're doing some kind of ritual, and it's pretty scary. It's an intense film, and again, the less you know, the better it gets when you actually sit down and watch it. So I do recommend The Wailing. It's fantastic. Trust me, the acting is great. The cinematography is fantastic. The score is amazing. It is a top class film that should definitely not be skipped on. So definitely give it a chance if you can.
Yeah, I've seen it come by on Netflix a couple times, but I think it's the long runtime that's kind of turned me off from it. But yeah, I will definitely have to check it out.
I definitely feel you do have to put a bit of time aside to watch it, but it's 100% worth it in my opinion. It was probably my favorite film of that year. But it's fantastic. I do recommend that.
I might just so I guess I'll take it from here.
Yes.
So my next movie is Blind Spotting, which I saw in 2018, and it was also my favorite movie of the year. I watched Jurassic Park Fallen Kingdom right after, and I hated it with every fiber of my being. So it's kind of funny just watching like this incredible masterpiece and then that pile of crap afterwards.
Immediately disappointed.
Yeah. Dinosaur crap.
It was awful. I hated every second of it. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about here. So Blind Spotting, I wouldn't give away too much of the plot. I think it's two guys. One's played by David Diggs, and the other is Raphael Casal. I believe. And they're best friends, and it just follows them for, I believe, roughly a week, just their lives in Oakland. And I gotta say, Oakland is also a big part of the story. Like it itself is a big character. So it just follows them, and Oakland is changing around them. They're changing, and I think it really is just a movie about identity and perspective, because you really get to see how the character of David interprets the world, how he looks at it, and how it's completely different from Raphael. For some context, I guess, David, obviously a black guy, Raphael, a white guy. So it really gives that cool is a strong word, just such an interesting take on this movie. For example, they'll see a cop car drive by, and for David, it's just, he's trying to play it cool. He's just walking, hands in his pockets, like trying to keep it as casual as he can, while Raphael is walking around with a gun poking out of his pocket and just kind of, I don't know, dancing, kind of swearing. He's just being loud. And it's just really interesting. And as I was saying, Oakland itself is kind of a character, because they grew up there, and they have their identity is kind of in Oakland, like it's really based around Oakland. But then Oakland is changing, and there's people that are like, I don't know, hipsters are coming in with their weird, I don't know, fruit juice, and there's a lot of gentrification, and it's just interesting to see them react to all that. And it's just an incredible movie with, I gotta say, incredible editing. And their relationship is also kind of built around rapping. They like rapping a lot. And there's a lot of interesting diegetic sound in the movie that they kind of make beats of and rap kind of back and forth. I don't know, it might maybe kind of sounds cheesy, but if you watch it, it is incredible. With the editing, it's just awesome. So I definitely recommend seeing that if you get the chance. I think you have to buy it somewhere. That's the only way I got to see it. I couldn't find it on YouTube.
I saw that it was on Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay.
So it's very possibly on there.
Okay.
Other than that, yeah, like you said, you might have to pick up the Blu-ray or the DVD,
I had
whatever is
to
available.
buy it for like $30 because I don't think they made too many copies.
Oh,
but worth it.
Yeah, that's probably the worst part about making a video like this, is that there's definitely a lack of audience for these films, so there's definitely going to be a lack of ways to watch it. A lot of the times how I end up watching these films is just Googling, buying, spending a crazy amount of money sometimes on the Blu-rays. Occasionally they will be put to streaming services. I think a lot of the ones we've said today are on streaming services, which is good. Other than that, though, sorry, Shawn, I did kind of interrupt you. What were you going to say? Or
I wasn't going to say anything. I was just
okay,
agreeing.
So all right, moving on. Sorry, Shawn. What was the next film you wanted to talk about?
I was going to talk about, and I can't believe I'm talking about it because it's a film that I would never expect myself to go out of my way to watch and then actually enjoy it, which is a French-Canadian film called Le Bolduc, about such person named Le Bolduc. Essentially, it takes place in the early 1900s, about this woman that goes by the name, and she's a singer, but it also shows all the struggles about living at that time and being a successful singer while also being a woman, and also, just family relations that she had at the time, which was also complicated. There's a lot of different little plot points to it, and it's kind of one of those. Again, it's a kind of biopic film, and again, something that I would never seek out to watch, but it was just playing, and I was able to watch it, and it was actually really well done. I think the design and the sets of the movie look extremely accurate, which surprised me, considering I don't think it had a very big budget whatsoever. So, yeah, it looks amazing in that regard, and just the acting is really, really good as well, actually. The whole thing is in French, but I think that really is needed for the fact that it is based on a French story, and it really does enhance it in that way. Which I think a similar film as well is Louis Cyr, is that film as well. It has a very similar feel to that, and yeah. So I mean, both of those movies are great, but I really think that is a good underrated film that I don't think a lot of people would have heard about, because again, it is like a low budget French Canadian film, but it is fantastic, and I highly recommend it.
All right. So yeah, we're just coming to the end here, so we'll just kind of start to do last films. The last film I want to talk about is Blood and Black Lace, and that's the Mario Bava film I was talking about earlier, and it's from 1964, and it's just a classic kind of slasher genre. But the thing that stands out, in my opinion, is just Mario Bava's directing with color, and how he works with actors and stuff, and how he places stuff in the set, and a big emphasis on the color there, because back in the 60s you were still getting films that were black and white every now and again, and Mario Bava kind of stretches the limits. I mean, in my opinion, he stretches the limits of what you can kind of see on films. I mean, the colors are so bright and vibrant, and it's just so appealing to look at, and it's just an overall great film. It's a great slasher film. It's fun to watch. It's not a super serious need to watch. It's a film you can put on in the background and kind of chat with your friends. But and also it is definitely a great film that has some stuff to say on beauty and what makes you beautiful and stuff. But it's definitely just a film you can watch any time of the day. Not a super long run time. You can just kind of have it on in the background and still enjoy it. You can watch it seriously and still enjoy it. It's a great film, and it's just a testament to Mario Bava himself on his directing, in my opinion. And I think that it's, in my opinion, one of his better films, and it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it. So Bart, if you have any last films, now's your time to say it. What would your last film be?
Ooh, I think it would have to be Burning by Lee Chang-dong, which is a South Korean film. It's also the movie I have the least to say about, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing at all. It's just the narrative and the plot. It's so, I don't know, there's so much up to interpretation that I don't even think there's one, there probably is, but like one cohesive plot line. There probably is in there, but it feels like it's so well manipulated with unreliable narrators, and just so much is left to like, okay, what did you think happened? It's very ambiguous, so I really won't go too much into the plot at all.
Yeah.
But it is overall just an outstanding character study of mainly these three characters. One guy who's kind of poor, down on his luck, just taking over his dad's farm. There's one city girl who's it's kind of a love triangle, so this girl's kind of going in between the two. And there's one guy, actually played by Stephen Young, who's very rich and successful, and he's trying to help the guy out on the farm a little bit. And it's just a really interesting dynamic, and sometimes the shots just go on for, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, and they just let all the characters just bounce things off of each other and have fun. But in that, there's a lot of nuance in the dialogue. So there's actually a really dark story, in my opinion, that you could completely miss if you just kind of look at it from at face value. The only issue I kind of have is it's roughly 2.5 hours, and because it can kind of drag a little bit sometimes, but at the same time, everything is so well shot and so beautiful. There's beautiful use of the color orange, which you'll probably see, especially with fire, hence the title. Yeah. But it completely excuses it. So it's not even terrible to sit through because it's just so stunning. So yeah, I would highly recommend this film. That's kind of all I have to say about it without giving anything away.
Yeah, that one's been on my list for quite a while to see. Again, the runtime was kind of scaring me off, but hopefully when I do find time, I'm able to watch it and form an opinion of it on my own. So moving on to Shawn, what was your last film you'd like to recommend to everybody?
I mean, it's a bit of a cult classic, but I gotta end with it because if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Is Weird Al's movie UHF. It is fantastic. I mean, the story itself is not that complicated. It's like a whole save the building kind of movie. Whole like we got to raise enough money to get to our goal. It's not a complicated concept,
sure.
But the actual other plot points that are in the movie, the other bits of comedy that are contained within it is just really, really fun. I mean, I watched this when I was a lot younger, and it was just a great time. And I always have to recommend that movie because it's just something that I think a good chunk of people might not have actually seen. And it's just a wonderful time. I mean, everybody knows who Weird Al is. Like, you can't not
For sure.
watch it and have a bad time. I think it's great.
It's also just kind of a ton of dumb fun. Like,
yeah, for sure.
It's just hilarious. And I believe that movie, when it first came out, got actually so hated on by critics that Weird Al made a statement asking if he ran over a bunch of the critics' dogs because it got so much hate. And he's like, why is it getting so much hate? He was like so confused. But it's definitely, being a Weird Al fan myself, yeah, like you said, it's definitely a lot better than I think reviewers have given it. And it's definitely worth the watch. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one.
I still have yet to see it, but I definitely will now.
Yeah, for sure. It's a fantastic film. So yeah, we're just reaching the end of our show here. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me. And I'd like to thank everyone for watching and listening. And hopefully today we've given you some other movies to add to your list. I know us in Ontario, we're still down in lockdown. So hopefully we've added some films that you haven't seen yet or have had or have heard of and have been waiting to see. Hopefully we've given you some new selections and hopefully you'll start watching them. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.